In this video, let me first show you all the additions done between the videos and then head over to the foreground. So in my background folder, I have this curves layer which is used to cast shadow from the cloud onto the background mountain, more additions to the paint layer. And then there is another curves layer that is curves 11. Let me just show you what it is in the mask. And that is used to adjust the value of the snow on the background mountain. Heading over to the midground clouds, another curves layer just to add some more contrast, and I've painted into the mask. And this is the paint layer which we were working on in the last lesson. Heading into the midground folder, refinements to the paint layer, and I have added another hue saturation layer in the middle to further help our balance. Then we have a midground haze folder, which is a layer with a small gradient on it. Heading into the sci-fi base and into the right folder. These are all the elements which are active. I just need to quickly reorganize the order. There is a dome, some buildings, and elements we worked on. So proceeding ahead, let's start working on the foreground refinement. Now going into the foreground folder and into the left folder, let me start turning off layers and just taking a look at what is contained in each. Now, since we want to refine or work on all of these together, I'm just going to collapse them into one. Let's call that left mountain. Add a layer mask to it. Toggle it on and off to make sure that everything is well contained. Now, using a chalk brush with pressure sensitivity, I'm going to start to refine the edge, reducing my brush radius and starting to paint along the textures of the general rock contours that I am seeing in the image. Maintaining the overall shape though, you can also see that during the extraction process, maybe due to the refine edge tool, we have a little bit of color overlap, and I'm just fixing that with this brush. Now, this is too straight, so let's add some unevenness to it. Similarly up here. Same goes for here as well. And all the way towards to the top. Some rocks standing out more than the others. Let's zoom into the lower section. All right, so that is looking much better. Next, let's turn our attention to adding some trees. So let me just quickly go back to the foreground folder and toggle my left off to make sure everything is in there. Add a new layer on top. I'm going to call it trees. Now I have a brush preset already made for trees, and I'll be including all my brushes used in this tutorial into a Photoshop brush file format for you guys to play around with. Now sampling a color from the plate and reducing the size of the brush to match what we see in the plate. I'm just adding some form and some interesting variation to the trees along the edge. Since there is a stark contrast between light and shadow at this point, it will be quickly catching your eye. But that also means that we don't need to add too much of details in here. We can get away by just having a great silhouette and the proper hint of light and shadow. So on a new layer placed at the bottom of the stack, I'm going to add more trees as they are receding onto the barrier. Now this will help us tie our foreground with our barrier. Erasing with the same brush. Let me make a new layer and use that as a clipping mask. So I've locked the layer's transparency, just sampling the color of the cloud behind and starting to use that to paint into our trees layer. Heading back to my dark color, which we sampled off the foreground plate. The next thing we need to do is add more trees. We have to go into the barrier section and add the rest of them in there. So on the top of the stack in the barrier, I made a new layer and I'm calling it that trees. And we are going to paint extra trees into this layer. Again, sampling colors from the plate. Actually, I should be moving that layer at the bottom of the stack because we want it behind the snow on the barrier. Sampling colors as we are fading our trees into the distance. Choosing an even lighter color just to add a little bit hint of vegetation spreading. Next, let's turn our attention to refining the lower section of the barrier. Going to my barrier layer here and choosing a chalk brush. Let's zoom in. And let me start removing or slightly painting into the mask which hides the barrier layer. Just kind of giving it a little bit uneven shape, but still maintaining the overall smoothness of the frozen lake bed. Creating a layer on top. Now using my clone stamp tool, just as before, I'm just going to clone the frozen lake part in. Again, sampling from different points in the scene. Switching over to my chalk brush tool. Just making sure I'm including the proper lighting in. Now, we don't want to leave any holes in our matte painting when we give them off to the next step. So let's make sure of that. Continuing to clean up the light spill on the barrier section. And this helping us to tie that in with the frozen lake. So I'm going to continue to add refinement to the matte painting using similar techniques as shown between the videos, and in the next one, let's turn our attention to working on some fine details for the sci-fi base.